Ava Monroe stood in the hotel lobby, her maid uniform stained, her hands trembling, while 3 white security guards accused her of stealing the billionaire's baby. She tried to speak, but every word she said in Mandarin only made them stare harder. "You expect us to believe you speak Chinese?" One sneered. Then the baby reached for her, crying out "Mama," and the camera started rolling. What happened next would break the internet in half. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. It was the kind of cold only Manhattan knew how to make: cruel steel gray skies, wind that cut through coats like regret, and the slow grind of luxury against labor. Inside the Belmont Grand Hotel, the air smelled of imported orchids, polished marble, and the tension of the quietly wealthy. Everything was pristine, curated, and curated again. But beneath the perfume of 5-star perfection moved a woman who was invisible by design. Ava Monroe, 32, mop in hand and eyes that saw more than they were supposed to, walked the corridor outside the penthouse level, with her earbuds out. She was the kind of woman who remembered how people ordered their coffee, how their eyes darted when they lied, and how to hold her tongue. A single mother from Harlem, Eva had worked this hotel for 6 years, long enough to know when something wasn't right. She was gathering the last of her cleaning cart when she heard it. A thump, then a faint, frantic whisper. She paused. A thin, unfamiliar voice pressed itself through the heavy door of the Whitmore penthouse, speaking fast in a language Eva didn't recognize immediately, but felt. Another whisper. A woman's voice. Rapid. Urgent. Eva leaned in closer. A sliver of breath. A syllable she did recognize now. Qing. Bonghua. She blinked. Mandarin. It struck her like memory. Late nights in community college, practicing tones and struggling through peen, while Jalen, her then-infant son, slept beside her textbooks. She hadn't spoken it in years. But the urgency in the woman's voice cracked something open in her. Something old, buried, and brave. Suddenly the door behind her opened. Not the penthouse. The elevator. 3 hotel managers rushed out, their faces tight with performance. One held a tablet, another a Bluetooth in his ear. "She won't calm down," one muttered. "She keeps pointing at the elevators and shouting. It's... what? Korean? Thai? No," Ava corrected without thinking. "It's Mandarin." They all turned toward her like she'd confessed to murder. "You speak it?" the lead manager, Mr. Dunning, asked, clearly skeptical. "A little," she said carefully. "Enough." They hesitated. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Dunning sighed, his voice thin with condescension. "Well, come translate then. Maybe she'll stop screaming." Downstairs in the chandelier-lit lobby, a scene was already forming. Guests with winter coats and judgmental glances looked on as a small woman in an elegant cream coat stood among a trio of hotel security guards. She wasn't shouting, but she was shaking, her voice rising and falling like wind through glass. Mrs. Lee Jin-yu, though Ava didn't know her name yet, was clutching her purse like it held something more than money. Her face was pale, but not weak. There was something regal in the way she stood, something proud even in panic. "Wadeha easy, Bujemla, Ching Ching," she pleaded, voice cracking. None of the staff responded with anything but hollow English. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down. Do you have a reservation? Is there someone we can call for you?" Mrs. Lee's hands trembled. Her eyes darted around the marble room. Desperate. Eva stepped forward. Uncertain. She inhaled. Then gently said, "Nen hao. Mi su yao bonjour." "Hello. Do you need help?" Time paused. Mrs. Lee froze, as if the world had stopped spinning for a breath. Then her entire body softened, and her eyes welled instantly with tears. Not because she was weak, but because finally, someone had heard her. "Me, Ting Dong, Wo," she whispered. "You understand me?" Eva nodded gently. "Shide. Waneng ba ni." "Yes, I can help you." In Mandarin, Mrs. Lee explained. She had been trying to reach someone in the penthouse, Clark Whitmore, but no one would let her up. She believed her phone was being tracked, and someone had tampered with her keycard. She wasn't supposed to be here this long. She feared someone was watching her. Eva translated pieces to the staff, but their skepticism grew. "Why would she be trying to reach Mr. Whitmore?" Dunning asked sharply. "He's not accepting visitors." "She says it's urgent," Eva replied. "Life or death." "Of course she does," he muttered, rolling his eyes. Eva clenched her jaw. She knew that look. That smug blend of superiority and doubt, reserved only for women like her and those with accents. She's a guest? Another staff member asked. No ID, a guard muttered. No room key. Says she was invited. Mrs. Lee was visibly shaking now. Ava stepped closer, reaching out gently. It's okay, Ava said softly in Mandarin. Tell me what happened. Mrs. Lee leaned in, her lips trembling, her eyes so sharp a moment ago glazed over. Then she said something that didn't translate cleanly. Something that sent chills down Ava's spine. Wajidao. Tada yin, arbushi tada. I know the baby isn't his. Ava's brow furrowed. What? But Mrs. Lee's knees buckled. She gasped, short, terrified, and collapsed into Ava's arms, her words fading into unconsciousness. A scream rose from a nearby guest. The hotel lobby erupted into gasps and movement. Ava held the woman's body as gently as she could, lowering her to the floor, heart thundering. From above them, 5 stories up, the faint sound of a baby crying drifted down the marble atrium. Somewhere behind the silence of money and status and polished surfaces, something terrible was unfolding. And only Ava had just heard the whisper that started it all. As paramedics rush in and hotel staff swarm, Ava notices something peeking from Mrs. Lee's coat pocket. It's a photograph torn at the edges of Clark Whitmore, holding a baby, standing beside Mrs. Lee. The whisper still echoed in Ava Monroe's ears as the elevator doors shut behind the stretcher. Mrs. Lee's collapsed body lay motionless under the fluorescent lights, the photograph she'd dropped now tucked into Ava's coat, Ava's fingers clenched around it in her uniform pocket, a thin strip of time and truth that refused to let go. And suddenly, all eyes were on her. The hotel lobby, once a portrait of stillness, now churned with murmurs and clipped authority. As security escorted the crowd away, Mr. Dunning, the floor manager with a jaw as stiff as his bow tie, turned toward Ava with a stare that could frost windows. Miss Monroe, he said sharply. A word. Ava glanced down at her uniform, at her rubber-soled shoes, still wet from mopping suite floors. She knew this tone. She'd heard it at school conferences, at grocery stores, even at traffic stops. It was the voice of authority when it thought it was hiding behind civility. They pulled her into a back corridor just off the service hall past the glistening banquet rooms and into the skeleton of the building. Ava stood, arms crossed as Dunning paced in front of her like he was rehearsing for a courtroom drama. You stepped well outside your role tonight, he began, arms folded. No translator, no clearance, no protocol. I just wanted to help, she said quietly. Helping doesn't mean overstepping, he snapped. It's not your job to insert yourself into situations involving high-profile guests. You're paid to clean, Ava, not to play concierge, translator, or whatever this was. There was something acidic beneath his words. You mean not to speak, she said carefully, the corners of her lips tightening. Not to be seen. He didn't answer.
Is that what this is about? She pressed. You're upset I spoke Mandarin?
Mandarin? Dunning gave a dry chuckle. Since when do you speak Mandarin? The question wasn't curiosity. It was accusation. And suddenly the past came rushing up from Ava's chest like heat. It started with her mother, long before the Belmont, long before hotels and scrubbing silver bathrooms that sparkled but never smiled back. Her mother had always told her, if you speak their language, they can't deny you exist. But Ava hadn't chosen French or Spanish in high school. No, she'd found herself drawn to the complexity of Mandarin, the music of the tones, the challenge of the symbols. It was her escape, her rebellion, her armor. She'd learned quietly, with borrowed CDs from the Chinatown library and bootleg apps on her cracked phone. At 21, after giving birth to Jalen, she'd rocked him in one arm while practicing flashcards with the other. She couldn't afford daycare or textbooks, but she could afford discipline. At night, after shifts at a diner, she'd head to community college with swollen feet and a full heart. Her Mandarin professor, a woman from Taipei, had once told her, you speak like someone who's been listening their whole life. She had been. But in this world, this hotel, this job language didn't matter if it came from the wrong mouth. Ava had always kept her skill quiet, hidden beneath her uniform like a secret tattoo. Until tonight, now back in the dim corridor. She stared down Mr. Dunning. I speak Mandarin because I wanted to understand people no one else bothers to, she said softly. And I heard a woman tonight who was terrified, who no one else could understand. You embarrassed the staff, he said coolly. You confused guests, and you involved yourself with someone who, frankly, we're still not sure belongs here. Ava blinked. You mean the Chinese billionaire woman you didn't bother listening to? You're dismissed for tonight. He cut her off. Report back at your regular shift tomorrow. And don't repeat this behavior again. The conversation was over. But something in Ava's spine had straightened. She walked away without another word. But her thoughts were screaming. Later that night, she returned in silence to the staff break room and checked the security logs. Most employees didn't know the back systems. Ava did. She was a watcher by nature. Always had been. She pulled up the incident footage from the lobby. There she was, crouched beside Mrs. Lee, holding her hand as she collapsed, framed like a savior, or a suspect. Then she scanned further back camera angles near the penthouse. Nothing obvious, but something was off.
Mrs. Lee had been up there.
Just minutes before she appeared in the lobby, she was seen near the service elevator by Clark Whitmore's penthouse door. Her expression wild, desperate. She banged on the emergency panel, then disappeared into the stairwell. Ava's breath caught. She needed answers. She changed out of her uniform and slipped into her hoodie and jeans. Then she took the late bus to St. Anne's General Hospital. The ER nurse didn't ask questions. One black woman recognizing another. Room 4. Mrs. Lee was asleep, her face drained, pale beneath the halogen ceiling lights. A monitor beeped steadily beside her. Ava stood in the doorway, unsure whether to approach. Then Mrs. Lee's eyes opened, barely a sliver, and she smiled weakly. You came, she whispered. Ava stepped inside. I had to. In Mandarin, Mrs. Lee explained. They told me to keep quiet. But I couldn't. Not after what I saw. Saw what? Ava asked, heart thudding. Mrs. Lee hesitated. Her voice trembled like a violin out of tune. I was supposed to meet Clark. Years ago. We had a project. Big. Global. But then it vanished. He vanished. Now he's here with a baby that isn't his. That baby belongs to someone else.
Who?
I don't know yet, but I know someone at the hotel is trying to silence me. I lost access to everything. My keycard, my translator, my assistant was fired. Then yesterday, someone tampered with my food. I felt sick after one bite. Ava leaned in. Do you think it's Clark? Mrs. Lee's eyes welled. He wasn't always like this. But now, I don't know who to trust. Outside the window, the wind howled. Ava reached into her pocket and pulled out the torn photo. This, she whispered. Is this you and Clark? Mrs. Lee stared at it and broke. A single tear ran down her cheek. He swore we'd change the world together. Ava sat in silence, unsure where the truth ended, and the betrayal began. She left the hospital with more questions than answers. Back at the hotel, she slipped into the service entrance, trying to process everything. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A video message. She opened it. Security footage. Of her. From just hours earlier. Holding Mrs. Lee's hand, whispering in her ear. The timestamp circled in red. Then a text followed. Mr. Whitmore wants to speak with you. Now. Ava stared at the message, her stomach folding into itself. She turns toward the private elevator. The top floor is already descending. Clark Whitmore is coming down, not waiting. The elevator slowed to a near-silent stop, its panel glowing penthouse. Authorized access only. Ava Monroe stood rigid in the corner, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The message from the anonymous number still burned in her chest. Mr. Whitmore wants to speak with you. Now. She hadn't asked to be summoned. She hadn't even gone home since the hospital. But something deeper than fear kept her still. Something like resolve. The weight of Mrs. Lee's whisper, the crumpled photograph in her pocket, the long-forgotten language that had spilled out of her like instinct. None of it made sense. And maybe that was the point. The elevator opened. The penthouse smelled of old money, Italian leather, and stress. Every light was dimmed to an expensive hush. But what cut through the silence wasn't a billionaire's voice. It was the wailing cry of a child. Ava stepped out, blinking. No staff, no assistant, no Clark Whitmore. Just a baby's muffled sob, echoing down the marble hallway. Hello, she called softly, her voice cautious. The cry grew louder. She followed the sound, weaving past towering art installations and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a city Ava couldn't afford to live in. Her footsteps padded across Persian rugs until she reached an open doorway. Inside, chaos lived. Toys scattered. A baby monitor blinking red. Bottles lined the counter, untouched, and in the center of it all, on a modern crib with rails too tall and blankets too thin, sat a baby boy screaming, flushed, breath-catching in hiccuped sobs. He couldn't have been older than 8 months. Tiny fists flailed. His face was wet and red. His chest heaved with every choking breath. "Hey, baby," Ava whispered, her instinct overriding everything. She rushed in, scooped him up before thinking, before remembering where she was, or what she was supposed to be doing. He was warm, frantic, and heavy with neglect. "You're okay." He clawed at her neck, searching, his mouth desperate, hungry. Her body moved before her brain could catch up. Years of motherhood kicked in like a code. With one hand, she gently pulled aside her sweater. With the other, she cradled his head. Her heartbeat matched his panicked sobs, as she offered what comfort she could, what she hadn't offered anyone since Jalen had outgrown it. The baby latched, and finally, silent. Just Ava's breathing, the rustle of silk curtains in the breeze, and a slow, soft suckling, as the boy Luca closed his eyes against her chest and exhaled. Then the voice came. "What the hell is going on?" Ava froze. Standing in the doorway, his face unreadable, was Clark Whitmore, the billionaire, the tech mogul, the man from the photo. And now, the father watching a maid breastfeed his child. The room dropped 10 degrees. Ava didn't move, couldn't. Her heart stuttered. This was it. She'd crossed every line: protocol, class, privacy, motherhood, and she was black, nursing a white billionaire's son. She waited for the blowback, the rage, the word fired. Instead, Clark's voice broke. "He hasn't eaten in 2 days." Ava blinked. Her mouth opened, but nothing came. Clark stepped in slowly, his movements fragile, like someone learning how to be a person again. "He's refused every bottle, every nanny. Even the pediatrician said to try formula from France." He let out a dry, exhausted laugh. "Formula from France." Ava adjusted slightly, still cradling the boy. "He's starving," Clark said, and then not as a mogul, but as a man defeated, he added, "I didn't know what else to do." There was no rage, no arrogance, just silence and surrender. Luca stirred in her arms, peaceful now. His cheek rested against her chest like he'd known her forever. Ava finally spoke. "He needs contact, real touch, someone who's not afraid of him." Clark sat down on the edge of the crib bench, his shoulders dropping like anchors. "She died giving birth," he whispered. "Luca's mother. She wasn't supposed to. We had everything planned. She was brilliant, PhD in neuroscience. Vegan. She wore silver rings on every finger." A pause, a breath. "She wanted a black nanny. Said they were the only ones who'd raise him with heart." Eva looked up sharply. Clark met her eyes, barely. "Her words, not mine," he added quickly. "But after she died, I hired white nannies anyway. I was scared of what the press would say. The optics. One headline: 'White billionaire hires black nanny for dead wife's son,' and my stock would crash." Eva's jaw tightened. Clark looked away. "I didn't want her to be right," he said quietly. "But maybe she was." Luca yawned. Ava's voice was calm but firm. "You don't need a nanny. You need someone who sees him." Clark stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "Would you stay?" "What?" He turned slowly. "I need help. Not just a babysitter. Someone Luca trusts. Someone who isn't just here for the check. Triple your salary. Full benefits. You'd live here." Ava stared at him, stunned. "I'm not asking you to be his mother," he added. "Just his piece." She didn't respond. She looked down at Luca, his tiny hand now curled in hers, and thought of Jalen, of long nights with no money, of hospitals that treated them like numbers, of school counselors who never saw potential, only statistics. She thought of Mrs. Le, of secrets buried beneath penthouse carpets. And suddenly the words spilled out. "What happened between you and Mrs. Lee?" Clark's face hardened. "That's not your concern." "It became my concern when she collapsed in my arms and begged me to run." His silence was answer enough. Eva gently handed Luca back into the crib. His body tensed slightly, but he didn't cry, just whimpered soft and tired. "She said someone tried to poison her," Ava said. Clark turned back, his voice cold now. "And you believed her?" She was scared. Alone. Nobody listened. Clark walked toward her slowly. "And yet, you did." Ava didn't flinch. That's what terrifies them, she said. A maid who listens. There was a long silence. Then Clark extended his hand. Stay tonight. We can talk more in the morning. Eva stared at it. The polished fingernails. The skin that had never scrubbed a floor. But behind the gesture was something else. A bargain. A beginning. Or maybe a trap. She reached out. Shook it. His grip was firm. Welcome to the penthouse, Miss Monroe. Ava returns to her new room, a guest suite behind the penthouse kitchen, and finds an envelope already on her pillow. No name. Just her photograph, taken from inside the hospital room. The guest suite smelled of citrus and silence. Ava Monroe stood motionless beside the bed, the envelope still trembling in her hands. It had no name, no return address, just her photograph. Taken from an angle only someone inside the hospital room could have managed. The lighting was soft, fluorescent, unmistakably sterile. Eva stood at Miss Lee's bedside in the frame, her hand wrapped gently around the older woman's. There was no message inside, just the photo. But that said enough. She'd only been in the penthouse for 2 hours, and already someone was watching. Someone wanted her to know it. Morning arrived quietly, with no alarms or wake-up knocks. But Ava wasn't the type to oversleep. Not here, not now. She dressed in plain navy slacks and a white cotton blouse, her version of armor, and emerged from her guest suite, just as the penthouse kitchen hummed to life. The private chef barely acknowledged her. 2 assistants nodded tightly. Only Luca smiled when she entered. Good morning, little one, she whispered, lifting him into her arms. He cooed, nestled his head against her neck, and Ava felt something shift, something honest, simple, human. But the room around her stayed cold. In the elevator later that morning, Ava caught the first whispers. 2 cleaning staff from the lower levels, both white, stood a little too close behind her. She's up there now? Like living there? Clark's really trying the whole charity case fantasy, huh? Watch her walk off with the silverware. Ava didn't turn around. She just stood still, eyes fixed on the mirror-polished doors, letting their words coat her like frost. She felt it again when she passed the concierge lounge later that day. A male supervisor, white-pressed fake smile, paused his sentence when Ava walked in to collect Luca's delivery bag. Didn't know nannies dressed like hotel guests now, he mumbled. And the woman beside him, the PR manager, laughed, too fast, too rehearsed. Eva looked at them, expression unreadable, then left without a word. Let them choke on their own smirks. The worst came that afternoon, when Kendra, Clark's executive assistant, cornered her near the penthouse hallway. You're Ava, right? Her voice held syrupy politeness too sweet to swallow. That's me, Ava said carefully. Kendra's eyes scanned her head to toe. So you're the new nanny? Eva nodded. Kendra leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. I mean this respectfully, but do you have formal experience with, infants in high-profile households? Eva tilted her head. I raised my son while working 2 jobs and attending college. I also nursed your boss's baby back from starvation. That count? Kendra blinked. I'm just looking out for Mr. Wetmore. Of course, Ava replied. I've noticed you're all very good at looking out for him. Kendra's lips pursed, but she said nothing else. Despite the tension around her, Luca became Ava's anchor. He refused food from anyone else, cried through feedings unless she held him, and only slept when her voice hummed lullabies. The bond was instant and deep. One afternoon, as she rocked him near the massive penthouse window, overlooking Central Park, Clark walked in quietly. He watched from a distance, not saying a word, as if trying to memorize the stillness in Ava's posture, the unspoken trust between her and his son. But Ava noticed something else, something underneath the stillness. Clark was watching her with a question he didn't dare ask. The days passed with increasing unease. Strange men in tailored suits began arriving late at night, never announced, never speaking above a whisper. Ava caught them once near the study, murmuring behind a half-closed door. She didn't recognize their faces, but their presence carried weight, too polished to be guests, too aggressive to be staff. The next morning, Clark was nowhere to be found. And that wasn't the only thing missing. Ava's spare keycard, gone. She tore her suite apart. No sign of it. The concierge claimed no reactivations had been requested. That same day, her phone buzzed. Blocked number. You're already being erased. Slowly. No name. No context. But Eva felt the message crawl into her lungs. She didn't tell Clark. Not yet. That evening, after putting Luca down for a nap, Ava decided to visit Mrs. Lee. She called the hospital. She checked out this morning. The nurse said.
What?
Ava asked. Where did she go? The nurse hesitated. We were told by a man who claimed to be her legal liaison, said she was being transferred for privacy. No forwarding address? None. Ava hung up. It didn't feel right. Something was tightening around her, and now Mrs. Lee was gone. Erased, just like the message warned. That night, while organizing Luca's clothes in the nursery, Ava noticed a flicker on the baby monitor. It wasn't Luca. It was a figure barely visible, crossing behind the nursery door. A blur of a shadow. She rushed out. Nothing. Every hallway light was on. No sound. No movement. Except one door was ajar. Clark's study. He was gone for the night. She stepped inside. Stacks of papers. Family portraits. Art pieces worth more than her annual salary. But one drawer stood out. Half open. Papers barely tucked inside. Curiosity won. Ava opened it slowly. Inside was a black and white photo. Aged. Edges worn. Two people stood arm in arm, at a conference table, Clark Whitmore and Mrs. Lee Jianyu, younger, smiling. Behind them, a screen displayed the name, Eclipse, Future Without Borders. Below that, a third person was cropped out. Only a shadow remained. Ava's eyes widened. This wasn't a casual connection. This was partnership. Intimacy. Maybe more. She flipped the photo over, in faded ink, to a future they'll never see coming. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. She stuffed the photo back into the drawer and slipped out just as the main elevator doors dinged. Clark. He walked in slowly, coat over one arm, eyes tired. Everything okay? He asked, voice low. Ava nodded. Yeah. Luca's asleep. Good, he said. But his eyes searched her like he knew something had shifted. Something on your mind? He asked. Ava shook her head. Just shadows. He nodded, silent, then disappeared into the master suite. Later that night, Ava's suite TV flickers on by itself. The screen shows a live feed, not of the hotel but of her, asleep in bed, being watched from behind the glass closet door. The soft hush of the Manhattan skyline did little to mute the sound of grief. Ava Monroe stood frozen in the shadowed hallway just beyond the glass doors that led to the penthouse balcony. She hadn't meant to spy. She'd been following the faint sound of Luca crying again in his sleep, checking to make sure nothing was wrong. But instead of her baby's whimper, she heard a grown man unraveling. There, seated on a weather-worn bench, made of Brazilian teak, was Clark Whitmore, head bowed, fingers dug into his hair, shoulders convulsing. The backlit skyline poured gold and steel around him, but he looked small, folded into himself, sobbing silently into the twilight. Billionaires don't cry. At least that's what the magazines said. That's what the headlines always promised. But Ava had never trusted headlines. She watched him for a long moment, hesitant, unsure if she was witnessing something sacred or something dangerous. Then he looked up and saw her. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Ava stepped onto the balcony without asking. The breeze caught the hem of her cardigan. She stopped just short of sitting beside him. You okay? She asked quietly. Clark wiped his face roughly, clearly embarrassed. Do I look okay? No, she said honestly. You look like you haven't slept since the day Hope left. A bitter laugh slipped out of him. Is that what this looks like? She finally sat, leaving enough space between them to keep things safe, but close enough for truth to pass. Clark stared into the night. I used to believe in the whole build a legacy thing. Platforms, equity, digital bridges. Thought I'd be remembered for something that mattered. Then what happened? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled something from his coat pocket, a small charm, shaped like a lotus. She gave me this. He said, lie, said it meant rebirth, renewal. Every time it blooms, it grows through mud. Eva said nothing. Clark's voice cracked. We were supposed to launch Eclipse together. A full merger, US-China tech partnership. One of the first ever at that scale. Ethical data mapping. International AI regulation. All of it built on mutual transparency. A pause. And then, poof. What happened? He looked at her. Eyes hollow. I don't know. One day she stopped answering. Her government liaison pulled out. My board blamed her. Her board blamed me. Overnight our joint stocks plummeted. I lost a third of my empire. She vanished. And now, he looked away again. Now she's back. Begging. accusing, saying things that don't make sense. Eva swallowed hard. Maybe they do make sense. Maybe you just don't want to believe them. He stiffened. She thinks someone's sabotaging both of you, Eva continued. What if she's right? You think someone inside my own company is tearing it down? Clark scoffed. You think it's impossible, Ava asked. That someone with money and access and a grudge couldn't pull that off. Clark didn't respond. Or she added, softly, maybe you already know who it is. He turned to her. Why are you helping me? I'm not helping you. She replied. I'm protecting that baby inside. And trying to make sense of a photo that should have never existed. He held her gaze, something unspoken flickering in his eyes. Mrs. Lee loved you, Ava said. It's written in how she said your name. You lost her because someone wanted you to. Clark's voice was barely a whisper. And if that someone's standing right beside me, then you'd better start paying attention. The next morning, Eva walked into the staff corridor of the hotel for Luca's meal delivery, and felt the cold all over again. This time it wasn't whispers. It was silence. Heads turned, then quickly turned back. Email stopped mid-sentence. The hotel staff had been briefed. She wasn't just the maid anymore. Ava tried to shake it off until she passed the HR office on her way back. The door was open. On the desk sat a folder labeled, Monroe, Ava Level 4 Screening, Urgent. She stopped, reached in, and froze. Inside were documents. Financial history. College transcripts. A note scrawled in red ink. Recheck all social associations. Cross-verify language proficiencies. How did she pass Mandarin 6 without heritage access? Her stomach dropped. They were digging into her past, not to verify her, to invalidate her. She stepped back into the hall, like the floor was falling. That night, she returned to her suite in the penthouse, hands trembling. She pulled out her old USB drive, the one she kept from her community college years. On it were her final essays, her Mandarin coursework, and a small project she'd done on cross-cultural technology. She opened the files, read her old words, how she'd written about Eclipse. Even back then, she'd studied Clark and Lee as case studies, never realizing how close she'd one day stand to both. She found the business article she'd saved, Project Eclipse: The Future That Vanished, and scanned it again. But this time, she noticed something she hadn't before. The original Eclipse board had 12 members. Only 11 were listed. One name was blacked out in every version, even on international copies. And one photo blurred, hard to make out, looked eerily similar to Kendra. Eva's breath hitched. She checked timestamps. Timeline. Kendra had been hired just weeks after Eclipse collapsed. And not as an assistant. Her title was Director of Strategic Oversight for the original Eclipse project, which meant Kendra had been in it from the beginning. She'd watched it burn, then walked away with a new job, right next to Clark. Just as Ava opened a private tab to dig deeper, her phone buzzed. No caller ID, just a message. Stop digging, maid. You'll lose more than your job. She stared at the screen. Behind her, Luca began to cry. And for the first time, Eva wasn't sure who to be more afraid of, Clark or the people he trusted. Eva receives a second message, this time with a photo of Jalen, her son, leaving school. The caption reads, "He won't be invisible like you." Eva's hands shook the entire cab ride uptown. She didn't even remember calling the car, only that her fingers moved fast, and without thought the second she saw Jalen's face on her phone screen. A grainy schoolyard photo. His head turned, backpack slung over one shoulder, his steps frozen mid-motion. The caption underneath wasn't a warning. It was a threat wrapped in racism. He won't be invisible like you. The photo was timestamped for 3:16 p.m., less than an hour ago. Ava stared out the cab window as Manhattan's skyline gave way to Harlem's heartbeat. Brick buildings, corner bodegas, murals painted over scars. Her home, or what used to be. She bolted up the stairs to her apartment, skipping the elevator, sweat beading on her back. Her keys barely fit in the lock, like someone had already tried jamming it. She pushed the door open, stopped. The apartment had been ransacked. Drawers overturned, couch cushions gutted, kitchen cabinet doors wide open. Jalen's books were strewn across the floor. Ava's framed diploma was shattered beneath her coat rack. Her voice caught in her throat. Jalen? No answer. She ran to his bedroom. There, curled up under his Spider-Man blanket, trembling like a leaf after the rain, was her 9-year-old son. Ava dropped to her knees beside him. Baby, it's Mama. I'm here. I'm here. He blinked at her. his bottom lip trembling. They came in, Mama. Who? I don't know. I hid like you said, behind the toy chest. They didn't find me. Ava swallowed the sob that tried to rip out of her chest. You're okay now, I promise. He clung to her like he was drowning. But Ava knew better. They weren't safe anymore. Not even in Harlem. She got Jalen dressed in a hurry and took him 2 blocks down to her childhood friend Tariq, the only person she trusted when the world slipped sideways. Tariq lived in a tiny 4th-floor walk-up with 5 monitors glowing like secrets in the dark. He had that permanent hoodie and laptop vibe. Ex-hacktivist turned freelance tech for good specialist. He greeted Ava at the door with a hard stare. You weren't supposed to be here tonight. I didn't have a choice, Ava said, pushing past him. Jalen took his usual seat on the beanbag by the window. Tariq offered him a juice pouch without a word. You're being followed? He asked, already booting up his machine. Ava pulled out her phone and showed him the photo. This came from a blocked number. 5 minutes after I accessed Eclipse's files. Tariq whistled low. Damn. That's some high-level surveillance. And someone broke into my place. He stopped typing. You call the cops? She laughed bitterly. A black woman working in a billionaire's penthouse gets her apartment tossed and her kids stalked? You think NYPD's gonna care? He didn't argue. Instead, he spun the chair and got to work. Within an hour, the room was filled with quiet taps and occasional curses. Tariq had backtracked the metadata on the image file. It had been routed through a series of offshore servers, then scrubbed, military-grade encryption. You're not dealing with amateurs, he muttered. This is high-level corporate. He paused. And look at this, Clark Whitmore's private servers were pinged by a China-based IP address 2 nights ago. Mrs. Le, Ava leaned in. Or someone using her digital signature. But that's not all. He pulled up an old set of encrypted emails buried in archived news servers. They wiped these from public access years ago. But I caught a ghost. He enlarged the screen. The subject line read, Project Eclipse, Final Phase. The email trail showed Clark and Mrs. Lee emailing weeks before Eclipse's collapse. One line stood out, written in simplified Mandarin. If we can't build the future together, they'll turn us into enemies. Eva stared at the line, her skin crawling. There's more, Tariq said. He opened a different browser. Social media. Mrs. Lee's name is trending. Someone leaked that she checked into St. Anne's under a fake name. Conspiracy accounts are running wild. He scrolled. Ava's stomach turned.
Was the Chinese lady a spy?
Another foreign investor playing victim to American success. Funny how the maid just happened to understand her. Coincidence? And then Ava's own name. Photos of her. In the hospital. In the hotel. Another headline. Breaking hotel maid tied to Chinese billionaire's disappearance. Ava's voice dropped. They're framing me. They're laying the groundwork, Tariq said. It won't be long before they connect dots that were never real. Ava sat back, staring at her trembling hands. They're erasing her, she whispered. Just like they tried to erase me. Jalen came up beside her, eyes wide. Mama? What's going on? She pulled him close. Something bad is happening. But we're gonna make it right. Tariq turned from the screen. We don't have much time. Whoever's behind this has resources. Media, tech, maybe even legal cover. Then we go deeper. Ava said. You sure? Tariq asked. There's no going back. She nodded. Mrs. Lee risked everything trying to speak the truth. I'm not going to let them silence her. They agreed to encrypt everything and hide Jalen at Tariq's cousin's place in the Bronx until further notice. As Ava left his apartment and stepped back into the Harlem night, her heart thundered, but her spine stayed straight. She had been underestimated her whole life. She wasn't invisible anymore. Back in the cab, she refreshed her phone. A new article had gone live. This one had a still image from the hospital. Ava holding Mrs. Lee's hand.
Caption.
Nanny or mole? The black maid at the center of a billionaire mystery. She stared at the headline until the words blurred. The war had gone public. As Ava gets out of the cab, a white woman in a trench coat brushes past her, whispering in perfect Mandarin. They know you speak it. Run. The world had decided who Ava Monroe was. And it wasn't who she'd ever claimed to be. By morning, her face was plastered across every headline, feed and viral conspiracy thread from New York to New Delhi. Suspicious maid speaks Mandarin fluently. Foreign mole, or billionaire's mistress. One outlet dubbed her the silent spy in Whitmore's penthouse. Another posted a freeze frame of her comforting Mrs. Lee. Emotional manipulation or planted asset. and just beneath the headlines were the comments. Relentless, venomous. Black girl with a Mandarin tongue? Nah, something don't add up. Of course they send the maid in first. Quietest pawns always move first. Clark always did like exotic help. The damage was being done, not through guns or lawsuits, but through perception, twisted through a lens that refused to see Ava as human. Inside the Belmont Grand, Clark had finally broken his silence. He called a private press conference on the top floor of the hotel, flanked by lawyers, PR advisors, and a white-gloved microphone. I've known Miss Ava Monroe to be nothing but kind, intelligent, and trustworthy, Clark said, his voice polished but trembling at the edges. She has done nothing wrong. I take full responsibility for her being dragged into this narrative. She is not a suspect. She is not a threat. Applause followed, but only from the curated crowd. Online, the story fractured again. So now she's his savior. He didn't deny sleeping with her. He's covering. Bet she has dirt on him. Back in her suite, Ava watched the live stream in silence, arms crossed, lips tight. Tariq texted from the Bronx. He defending you or protecting himself? Ava didn't respond, because she didn't know. Later that day, while tidying up the nursery, Ava moved Luca's favorite toy box out of the corner. Something knocked against the side. A sharp sound, plastic on metal. She paused, reached in, and pulled out a small white flash drive, wrapped in pink tissue paper, with Chinese characters scribbled in marker. Her fingers went cold. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mrs. Le. She plugged it into her personal laptop, hands trembling. The files were encrypted, but she remembered something Mrs. Lee had once whispered at the hospital. Lotus 6. Capital L. She typed it in. The screen lit up. One folder. Orchid Tree Project Archive. Inside were documents, spreadsheets, contracts. But it wasn't about Eclipse. It was about Orchid Tree Data Systems, a shell company buried inside Clark's parent corporation. The documents were horrifying. Detailed logs of facial recognition scans taken through hotel lobby cameras, ethnic profiling tags, sentiment analysis software designed to rate emotional reactions based on race. Ava blinked hard as she scrolled through an entire section labeled Minority Emotional Yield Metrics. The hotel, and by extension, Clark's empire, wasn't just hosting guests. They were mining data through surveillance, exploiting racial behavior patterns, monetizing emotion, and she'd been in the center of it all. Suddenly Ava remembered something Mrs. Lee had said at the hospital. The baby isn't his. Could she have meant metaphorically? Was Luca part of an experiment? Was Ava? Her stomach twisted. She called Tariq. You sitting down? She asked. Always, he said. What you got? She walked him through what she'd found. Silence on the other end. Then, she wasn't trying to expose Eclipse. She was trying to expose him. And now she's gone, Ava whispered. But I don't think she's missing. What do you mean? I think she's hiding. On purpose. That evening, Ava fed Luca while watching a rerun of Clark's press appearance. His words were too perfect, too polished. She replayed one moment, where he said, Miss Monroe has been a quiet support during one of the hardest weeks of my life. Quiet. Not brave. Not integral. Not essential. Just quiet. A maid who knew her place. A help who spoke when spoken to. Later she joined Tariq on a private encrypted call. They planned to trace the documents on the flash drive and cross-reference timestamps with Clark's known business moves. Midway through the search, Tariq's voice cut out. Ava squinted at the screen. Tariq?
No answer.
Then she saw it. His cursor began moving on its own. Files started closing. His screen began flickering. A warning popped up on her end. Remote intrusion detected. Tariq, shut down now. But the screen had already gone black. Then, in red font, you were warned. Stay in your lane. A second later, every alarm in the Belmont Grand exploded at once. Fire. Evacuation. Emergency. Ava grabbed Luca and raced into the hall. Smoke filled the air. But there was no fire. Just chaos. Sirens. Panic. She ran past the concierge desk where a line of security guards shouted orders. Her phone buzzed. Another message. Next time, we take the kid. As Ava pushes through the smoke toward the exit, she spots a familiar figure across the lobby. Mrs. Lee, alive, disguised in a hotel uniform, signaling Ava to stay quiet and follow. The fire alarms hadn't stopped. Ava gripped Luca tighter against her chest, as chaos pulsed through the marble veins of the Belmont Grand. Yes, streamed out in silk robes and tailored suits. Sprinklers spat confusion. Security barked half-baked orders into radios that crackled with interference. But Ava wasn't running. Not yet. Because Mrs. Lee, very much alive, had just locked eyes with her across the smoke-hazed lobby. Wearing a maid's uniform, her hair tucked beneath a cap, Mrs. Lee moved like vapor, soft, deliberate, hidden in plain sight. Her hand raised subtly, palm out, a silent wait. Ava froze, heart thundering. Mrs. Lee's expression was firm but pleading. Then she disappeared behind the corner service hallway, gone before anyone noticed. Luca stirred in her arms. Ava rocked him gently. She had to choose flee with her son, or follow a ghost who wasn't supposed to exist. She made the choice. Ava ducked into the service corridor, glancing behind to make sure no one was watching. The hallway was damp and quiet, only the soft hum of old pipes and buzzing fluorescent lights guiding her steps. She pressed the elevator button with her elbow, still cradling Luca. A ding. The door slid open. Inside it smelled faintly of bleach and metal. She stepped in, turned, and hit the button for B2. Sublevel archives, just like Mrs. Lee had once whispered in code. The doors began to close. That's when she noticed it. The emergency button was missing. Not broken, not jammed, completely gone. The air shifted. Her stomach dropped. Before she could reach for the open doors button, the elevator jerked violently, then stopped. The lights dimmed. Smoke began to seep through the ceiling vent. Not fire smoke. Synthetic. Controlled. White. Like a test. Luca whimpered. No, 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 Ava's voice cracked, fingers scrambling for her phone. No service. She pounded on the door, kicked the panel. Help. Someone please. The air was thickening, not enough to choke, but enough to disorient. She backed into the corner, clutching Luca close, trying to angle his face away from the creeping fog. And that's when it hit her. Flashback. 10 years old. A single apartment in Crown Heights. Her mother in the kitchen. The smell of burnt oil. A fire that climbed the walls like fingers. The door stuck. Smoke in her throat. Her mother screaming. Then silence. Ava closed her eyes, throat tight. And not her, she whispered, more to herself than anyone. I get out. I always get out. She wrapped Luca in her sweater, tore off her headscarf, and stuffed it under the door crack. Every survival instinct she'd ever learned on the streets, in classes, from her mother kicked in. Then she looked up. A panel was loose in the ceiling. She shifted Luca to one arm, and reached up with the other. The smoke was thicker now. Her lungs burned. But she found it. A grip. A ridge. She pushed the panel open, coughing hard. Above her was the elevator shaft. Dark, rusted, silent. She shoved the diaper bag through. Then Luca. Then hoisted herself up. Her arm scraped against the metal. Blood smeared the frame. Her breath came in gasps. She pulled Luca against her chest, wedged herself against the wall, and began inching her way along the crawl space. One hand, one foot, one prayer. She found a ladder, rusted, bolted into the shaft wall. The next floor was just above, maybe 10 feet. A door marked maintenance. She climbed. Luca pressed to her chest, every muscle screaming. She kicked the access panel. Once, twice. On the third kick, it snapped open. She tumbled through onto cold tile. The hallway was empty. She laid Luca down gently on the floor beside her, gasping for air. He cried softly, still breathing, still here. Ava staggered to her feet. Footsteps pounded from the hallway. A group of staff rounded the corner. Security engineers and Mr. Dunning, the hotel manager, looking entirely too calm for someone in a supposed emergency. He stopped short. Ava Monroe, he said flatly, as if reading from a report. We were just looking for you. She stepped protectively in front of Luca. Someone disabled the elevator, sealed the emergency button, flooded it with smoke. He raised a brow. A serious accusation. But considering the chaos this morning, and your current role, perhaps you simply panicked. I didn't panic, she snapped. I survived. Dunning's expression shifted just enough to reveal the contempt beneath his polish. We can't have someone with such volatile behavior staying in a high-security residence, especially with a child. You mean me? She said. I mean people who are unpredictable. Racist subtext, wrapped in corporate civility. Before he could continue, another voice cut in. You touch her, you deal with me. Clark. He stepped into the hallway, suit jacket off, Sleeves rolled. Dunning paled. "Mr. Whitmore." Not another word, Clark barked. But Dunning tried anyway. She snuck into a restricted elevator. She could have endangered the child. Clark's eyes were steel. "She's the only reason that child is alive." The hallway fell silent. Tension crackled between whiteness and authority, power and presence. Dunning stood straighter. "This is a liability issue." "You're the liability," Clark snapped. "You ever talk down to her again, you'll be scrubbing public restrooms with a toothbrush." Dunning backed off, but not before shooting Ava one final icy glance. Ava said nothing, but she didn't need to. Later, back in the penthouse, Ava sat on the couch, rocking Luca as Clark poured her a glass of water. "You okay?" he asked softly. "No," she answered, voice low. "But I'm alive." Just then, a knock on the door. Clark walked over. A hotel guest stood there. A woman in a powder blue trench coat. Ava's eyes widened. "Mrs. Lee." She stepped inside, pulled off her wig, and looked directly at Ava. "They know everything," she said. "We need to run. Now." Before Ava can respond, the TV screen behind them flickers on, broadcasting live drone footage of the penthouse from above. Silence followed them through the narrow corridor into the heart of Manhattan's historic Chinatown. Ava Monroe's grip tightened around Luca, her senses sharpened by fear. Mrs. Lee, her hair pulled back, dressed in a muted coupole beneath a long dark coat, led the way into a back entrance that smelled of incense, steamed dumplings, and secrets. They traveled down a labyrinth of low ceilings and red lanterns, until at last, a worn wooden door opened onto a hidden parlor stacked with faded calligraphy and the hum of an old radio. Inside waited Tao, a friend from Mrs. Lee's old networks, whose face was lined with cautious recognition. Once inside, Mrs. Lee exhaled, finally allowing herself to truly look, at Ava. "We're safe, for now," she whispered. "Here, no cameras, no watchers." Ava sank onto a wooden bench, Luca asleep in her arms. "Tell me everything." Mrs. Lee closed her eyes, the past unfolding in her voice like ink on rice paper. "Project Eclipse was ours. I believed in it. A global exchange platform, equitable, transparent, bridging East and West," she began. "Clark and I, we dreamed it would change surveillance into dialogue. We co-developed the architecture, pushed for ethical AI before it was trendy. But someone in his company stole Eclipse. They buried me. Discredited me. My keycard stopped working. My messenger was gone." Ava looked at her, breath catching. "You think it was internal?" Mrs. Lee nodded, voice trembling. "They rewrote the code. Launched a shell company, Orchid Tree, to run surveillance under the guise of security. The penthouse cameras. The emotional algorithms. That flash drive was just the surface." Eva stared, heart pounding. Mrs. Lee continued. "They erased me in business, then in media. I wasn't calling for help. I was calling for justice. But they responded with threats." Eva folded Luca close. "It's why you spoke up," she said softly. "Because no one else would." Mrs. Lee wiped her eyes. "I needed someone who could understand, who could translate not just language, but intention." They sat in the hush, the hum of the radio a distant echo. And then Ava felt it. The pull of something bigger, her mother's fire. Flashback. She was 7. Torn poster announcing the library's closure. Her mother, eyes fierce, standing between shelves, local officials at the door. Her mother raising Ava onto a stool to read poems about dignity. The library saved, at least for a moment. It's the same fire now. Ava looked at Mrs. Lee. "We do this together. But if we go public, if Eclipse or Orchid Tree connects to this, we'll be targets," Mrs. Lee warned. "They'll come for both of us." Ava nodded, chest tight. "I don't need protection. I need truth." They spent the night encrypting files, drafting a plan to leak data safely, mapping media allies they could trust. But when Ava finally drifted into a rare sleep, thoughts tangled with responsibility and fear. Morning came with a silent scream. Ava bolted upright. Luca's crib empty. "Luca," she whispered, throat raw. Mrs. Lee grabbed her arm. "He's gone." Ava's world tilted. Her heart slammed. The room spun. "Kay," she croaked. Voice gone. "Where?" Mrs. Lee's eyes flared. "Someone broke in. Took him." Eva rushed across the room through the papers, the encrypted files, the plans, and out to the dim light of Chinatown morning. Her son, gone. Ava's phone buzzes with a location ping. Luca's GPS tracker, hidden in his boot, showing he's in the penthouse, but on the surveillance floor. Eva's hand trembled as she stared at the blinking dot on her phone. Luca's GPS tracker, hidden in the sole of his tiny boot, a desperate measure she'd installed weeks ago, never thinking she'd need it, was now her lifeline. He was inside the Belmont Grand, in a section of the building most guests didn't even know existed. Sub-level 4, access restricted. Her breath shallowed. Mrs. Lee stood beside her, in the narrow Chinatown alleyway. Her voice as quiet as her face was pale. That floor doesn't appear on public blueprints. It does on mine, said a voice behind them. Ava turned sharply. Tariq stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, breathless, having run 3 subway stops after Ava's call. His eyes flicked to the screen, then to Ava. You remember the old Eclipse schematics? The ones Clark buried before the merger failed? Ava nodded. I didn't delete them, they recoded them, buried inside Orchid Tree's servers. Sublevel 4 is listed there as a bio-integrated storage and analytics wing. Ava's stomach twisted. What does that mean? Tariq looked at her grimly. It means they weren't building just software. They were building test subjects. The trio wasted no time. Tariq rerouted a fake delivery access request to Belmont's underground level. He posed as a technician while Mrs. Lee forged ID badges, using a contacts database from her former business network. Ava wore her old maid's uniform, altered just enough to get past security, hoping the familiarity would disarm suspicion. At the freight elevator behind the hotel's delivery entrance, they moved with calm urgency. Ava could feel her pulse in her teeth. Her son was somewhere beneath their feet alone. Maybe scared, maybe worse. I should have known Kendra was part of this, Ava whispered as the elevator dropped past the basement floor. She wasn't just part of it, Mrs. Lee said. She's the reason Eclipse fell. She was my assistant once. She sold our early schematics to Orchid Tree's shadow investors, and then climbed her way into Clark's trust. The elevator stopped. No chime, just a soft hiss as the doors slid open. Sublevel 4 was bathed in white light, surgical, cold, inhuman. The air smelled like bleach and metal. They crept through a corridor lined with tinted glass. Behind one wall, Ava spotted a white room where 2 technicians were analyzing a vial of blood. Next to it, labeled in red marker, Subject L 3, genetic pairing mapping. She pushed closer. Her breath caught. It was Luca, sleeping under dim lights. Wires attached to his arms. A nurse monitored screens behind him. Ava's knees almost gave out. We have to get him out of here. Tariq typed furiously on a tablet, trying to override the door lock. Mrs. Lee scanned the lab logs. This isn't just medical, she said. They're mapping inherited emotional response, trying to create AI that mimics empathy using biometric data from real infants. Eva's mouth dropped open. You're saying they're using my son to teach machines how to feel? Yes, Mrs. Lee replied. And using his DNA as the framework for predictive behavior. If they can isolate emotional resonance, they can manipulate how people react. Politically, financially, socially. And what about Clark? Ava asked, her voice nearly breaking. He never signed off on this. Mrs. Lee's expression didn't change. He wouldn't have needed to. Once Eclipse was dismantled, the shell companies operated independently. The lock clicked. The door opened. Ava rushed in. She scooped Luca from the bed, ripping off the wires. He stirred, whimpered, but settled when she whispered his name. Tariq kept watch from the door. 2 minutes before security checks this corridor. Eva turned to Mrs. Lee. We leak everything. Now. Mrs. Lee nodded and handed Tariq a flash drive. This has the internal memos. Test subject logs. A signed protocol by someone codenamed Hesper. Tariq's fingers flew over his tablet. Sending to every news contact, university and whistleblower site I know. Then the hallway lights dimmed. A voice echoed over the speaker system. Cold. Detached. Unauthorized presence detected in sublevel 4. Security lockdown initiating. Ava clutched Luca tighter. Go, Mrs. Lee hissed. They bolted through the hall, heading back toward the elevator shaft. But just as they rounded the final corner, he appeared. Clark Whitmore, alive, wearing a black coat, collar upturned, his hair a mess, face pale, and in his right hand, a gun. Ava stopped cold. He looked at her, eyes unreadable. Put him down. Clark, Mrs. Lee began. Don't. His voice cracked. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Ava stepped back. You expect me to believe that? You signed the contracts. I signed what my board told me to sign, he said. I thought we were building something ethical. Something beautiful. You mean like Eclipse? Mrs. Lee said, voice steel. You left me for dead, and then let them hijack it. I was manipulated. No, Ava said sharply. You were comfortable. Clark looked at Luca. Something flickered in his eyes. They told me he was mine, he whispered, that his DNA matched mine. I never tested it. I just wanted to believe it. Ava's heart seized. What? I thought he was my son. His voice broke. I thought he was all I had left. And now that he's not? She asked. He raised the gun slightly. But it shook. I didn't come here to hurt you, he said. I came to stop what I started. A beat of silence. Mrs. Lee stepped between them. Then prove it. Let her go. Clark's hands trembled. He lowered the gun slowly. Then a voice behind him. Kendra. No, Clark. You don't get to play hero now. Kendra steps into view with her own weapon raised, flanked by 2 Orchid Tree agents. She smiles at Ava. You should have stayed the maid. The barrel of the gun hovered between truths too old to fix, and lies too comfortable to unlearn. Ava Monroe stood frozen. Luca clutched against her chest. The baby stirred, sensing tension like animals sense storms. His quiet whimper was the only sound louder than the silence that had drowned the underground facility. Across from her, Clark Whitmore's hands shook. His jaw clenched. The weight of grief, betrayal, and confusion had dragged his once polished exterior into something unrecognizable. The powerful tech titan, the clean-cut capitalist savior, the mask had slipped. You lied to me, he said, voice hollow, eyes locked on Ava. All this time you've been playing me. Ava's eyes narrowed. You faked your death, Clark. You set this in motion. Don't project your guilt onto me. I did it to catch the leak, he shot back, the tremble in his fingers growing. I thought I could trust you, and then the documents were released. The media turned and everything unraveled. I released the truth, she said, stepping forward, slow but steady. You want someone to blame because you can't face the rot growing inside your company. But I didn't lie to you. Behind him, Kendra smirked, her weapon aimed squarely at Ava. He's not as sharp as he looks. The old empire's dying, and he still thinks he can fix it with guilt and charm. Shut up, Kendra, Clark snapped, his voice breaking. Mrs. Lee stepped between them then, her gaze calm but piercing. She, Mrs. Lee said, nodding to Ava, is more loyal than you ever were. Clark flinched like she'd slapped him. Mrs. Lee's voice dropped to a whisper. She risked everything to protect your child, while you vanished into the shadows of your own empire, hoping it would clean itself. Clark's shoulders sagged, his arm lowered slightly, but the gun remained in his hand. Do you even know who I am anymore? Ava asked, her voice low, tender. Because I do. He turned to her, his face a storm of conflict. I'm a mother, she said, gently swaying Luca. Not a tech analyst, not a spy, not your savior. Clark looked down, breathing hard. Do you remember what it feels like to be a parent, Clark? Not a provider, not a protector, just present. He didn't answer. I do, she continued. My boy Jalen, he doesn't care about stocks. He doesn't care about whether I speak Mandarin or mop floors. All he wants is for me to be there, to show up, even when it's hard, even when it's hopeless. Clark's eyes glistened. His mouth quivered. That's what legacy is, Ava said. Not patents, not empires, just the courage to be seen, and to see. Slowly, carefully, he lowered the gun to his side. Mrs. Lee exhaled, shoulders softening. Tariq stepped forward, still tense but ready. Then, boom. The lights went red. The hallway buzzed with static. Facility lockdown initiated. Doors slammed shut across the level. Alarms screamed. Kendra's expression shifted from smug to stunned. What the hell? Tariq looked at his tablet. Someone just triggered the internal override. We're sealed in. Was it you? Ava asked, her voice rising. Kendra shook her head. Why would... Mrs. Lee turned to Clark. You have access. Did you plan a backup? Clark's face drained of color. No, not this. The intercom crackled. Then a voice filled the corridor. Calm. Controlled. American. Well done, everyone. We've been watching. Eva felt a chill crawl up her spine. It's admirable. Really. How far truth will drag people before it breaks them. The voice wasn't Kendra, wasn't Clark, wasn't anyone she knew. It was someone else entirely. Now, Let's test your loyalty the way we always test integrity, by pressure. Tariq's tablet screen began to glitch. Static replaced code. Ava turned to Clark. Who is that? He looked as lost as she felt. That's not anyone on my payroll. Mrs. Lee grabbed Ava's wrist. This was never just about us. No, Ava whispered. It's bigger. Much bigger. On a locked monitor behind them, a file opens itself, revealing surveillance footage of Ava nursing Luca in the penthouse, spliced with fake voiceovers, framing her as the orchestrator of the entire operation.
Then, uproping to world media channels.
They escaped the facility through a maintenance duct while the lockdown scrambled internal comms. Tariq's hacking, combined with Mrs. Lee's passcodes and Clark's guilt-worn clearance, got them past biometric doors and fire-gated corridors. But Ava didn't feel like she was running away. She felt like she was being pulled forward. By truth. By justice. By rage that had outgrown silence. They regrouped inside an abandoned subway passage near Canal Street. Mrs. Lee leaned against a rusted beam, panting. There's one place left, she said softly, almost afraid to speak it. The 4th floor of the Belmont Grand. Ava blinked. What? The hotel doesn't have a 4th floor. Exactly, Mrs. Lee replied. It doesn't exist on the elevator, or in the guest records, but I helped design it during the earliest Eclipse expansions, back when we believed the hotel would be a safe pilot hub for transparent surveillance. Before it was corrupted, Clark, sitting against a wall, nodded slowly. We used it to prototype data interfaces. Now, I don't know what it's become. Tariq was already typing. I've scanned every city permit and blueprint issued to the Belmont. No mention of a 4th floor. Because it was registered under a shell identity. Project Meridian, owned by a Luxembourg-based holding company, Mrs. Lee said. Let me guess, Ava added. Owned by Orchid Tree.
Mrs. Lee nodded.
They moved fast. Tariq faked corporate travel badges. Clark posed as a returning board member, his still public photo enough to get them past lobby security. Mrs. Lee wore a face mask and hood, and Ava slipped back into her maid uniform, again playing the role everyone had been comfortable underestimating. They entered through the freight elevator at 3 a.m. Clark swiped his card. The buttons lit up. There it was.
Before!
No label. No chime. Just silence. The doors opened to darkness. A corridor stretched out, sterile and cold. White panels glowed faintly beneath their feet. Motion sensors blinked to life as they moved. Ava's skin prickled. This feels wrong, she whispered. Tariq nodded. Because it is. They passed doors labeled only in numbers, each one coded by ethnicity, gender, behavioral category. Room 412, African American, Emotion Recognition Suite. Room 4039, Latin X, Accent Adaptation AI. Room 445, Asian American, Predictive Compliance Test. Ava's breath caught. They're not just watching, they're experimenting. Inside the rooms, glass screens played footage. Thousands of hotel guests, unaware, laughing, sleeping, arguing, each tagged with metadata, skin tone, dialect, stress response, and worse, beneath each name were ratings, stars, percentages, trustworthiness index, emotional volatility, subversive potential. Clark stumbled. Oh my God. Mrs. Lay looked sick. This is what they used Eclipse to build. They passed a locked archive room. Tariq hacked in. Inside, Ava found what she didn't realize she was looking for. A folder labeled Monroe Ava. She opened it. Photos, notes, scans of her face, sleeping, walking, nursing Luca. A red banner across the top, flagged, potential disruptor, subsection language anomaly, surveillance resistance, emotional influence. A note underneath, reclassify under threat tier 2 if media gain traction. Her hands shook. I was never invisible, she whispered. I was studied, watched, and measured like a risk. She closed the folder with a snap. This ends now. Tariq uploaded everything to a secure leak system. News outlets, human rights watchdogs, encrypted social justice servers. A chain of exposure that couldn't be shut down by one court order. Are you sure? He asked. Once I press this, there's no taking it back. Ava nodded. Do it. He pressed enter. The upload began. 47%. Then, just as it hit 100%, the floor shuddered. The lights snapped off. The walls went dark. And then, all of Manhattan's power grid went down. Every block, every light, Every tower. The city of money and surveillance fell silent. In the flicker of emergency red light, Ava turns to see a nearby terminal screen, powering back on, running a live command. One line flashes across it. Failover activation protocol Blackbird. Then, begin AI override. The blackout ended after 8 hours. But by then, the world had already made up its mind about Ava Monroe. She woke up on a borrowed mattress in a Queen's safe house. Luca curled beside her, his chest rising and falling in the innocent rhythm of unknowing. The windowless room smelled like dust and boiled rice. Her phone, finally charged, buzzed with hundreds of unread notifications. Tariq's message was first. We're global. NYT, BBC, Al Jazeera. Every feed's talking about you. Ava stared at the screen. At the headlines that no longer belonged to her but had swallowed her name like wildfire. Whistleblower Maid leaks secret AI surveillance program. Nanny or national threat? She spoke Mandarin. Then the world stopped listening. Her photo was on every banner, some cropped to make her look noble, others distorted to make her look dangerous. In some posts she was hailed as the new Rosa Parks of data justice. In others she was framed as a pawn for foreign governments. She'd told the truth, and now the truth was out of her hands. By noon, crowds had formed outside the Belmont Grand, holding signs chanting. Some held "We Are All Ava" posters. Others screamed "Deport her now." The digital world wasn't kinder. Tariq forwarded Ava a post with 500,000 shares. A side-by-side, her holding Luca in the penthouse, and the words, "This is how infiltration begins." The comments tore her apart. Terrorist in a maid uniform. Why is a black woman speaking Chinese? What else is fake? Bet she staged the whole baby stunt for sympathy. Ava scrolled, numb, then stopped cold. A video. Someone had leaked the surveillance footage of her breastfeeding Luca. It had been edited, reframed with ominous music, layered with captions in blood-red font. Who is she really? It wasn't a clip anymore. It was a meme, a joke, a weapon, and it had gone viral. By nightfall, Ava received the blow she hadn't seen coming. Jalen was gone. A caseworker from Child Services had shown up at Tariq's cousin's house. They claimed it was temporary protective custody based on her involvement in high-risk activity. They cited the media attention, the concerning behavior, no warning, no phone call, just one document. Placement necessary for child's safety amid ongoing federal investigation. She screamed into the kitchen wall, broke down on the tile floor. Mrs. Lee tried to console her but couldn't. Her presence, too, had become dangerous. "They'll use me to hurt you," she said. "I have to vanish again." And she did, fading into another identity, another city, another ghost story. Clark? Gone too. Last Ava heard, he'd checked into a private rehab clinic in Switzerland under his mother's maiden name. She was alone, until one final message came through. Encrypted. Untraceable. A single line of text. "You did it. But it's not over." There was no name, no context. But Ava didn't need it. She understood. She was no longer a maid. She was a mirror, and people hated mirrors when they weren't ready to see themselves. That night, as she sat on the edge of a fold-out cot, Tariq knocked gently. "You seen this?" he asked. She took the phone. A video looped on screen. Her again. Cradling Luca. The same penthouse moment, now stylized with sparkles, sad piano music, and captions like, "She loved him like her own. Even if he wasn't." Some mothers don't need permission. It had 6 million views. No context. Just feeling. Ava didn't know whether to cry or scream. Internet sympathy was as fleeting as its cruelty was permanent. Her phone buzzed again. A new post trending. Meadgate. Then, a still image. Jalen, sitting alone, in a foster facility. Captioned, "Child of surveillance hacker, now in state custody. Is he safe?" The courtroom buzzed like a beehive on the verge of combustion. The air inside was clinical and sterile, but Ava Monroe's presence ignited emotion the walls couldn't hold. Every bench was filled, cameras were barred, but sketch artists had already inked her face across every morning paper. Her hair was pulled back, her blazer a borrowed navy, one size too big. She stood when the bailiff instructed, shoulders squared, hands locked together in a quiet war with tremble. The charge list took nearly 5 minutes to read. Criminal trespassing, data theft, breach of classified cyber infrastructure, reckless endangerment of a minor, domestic conspiracy with a foreign national, Every time the clerk said allegedly, it felt thinner, like the words were a performance the world needed, before deciding how much it hated a black woman for knowing too much. The prosecutor, a wiry man with a sharpened tone and a Princeton smile, paced in front of the jury, like a pastor on a political Sunday. She's not on trial because she cleaned floors, or because she spoke Mandarin, he said, voice rising. She's here because she violated national security. She weaponized a child. She used access to infiltrate a system that trusted her. He turned sharply to the bench. This is not about race. This is about accountability. But Ava could feel it. The subtle way they said "made" like a stain. How they never used the word mother. Her defense attorney, Malika Reyes, a fiery Latina civil rights specialist from Detroit, walked the courtroom like she was reshaping the ground with every step. Let me tell you what isn't on trial, she said. Lies. Because we've already seen those exposed. She gestured toward the evidence table, news clippings, leaked files, Clark's signature on buried AI documents, the algorithm that labeled Ava a threat, simply for being herself. She didn't break in, Reyes said. She broke through a wall built to watch people like her and discard them. She walked to the jury. Ask yourselves, if Ava had been blonde, white, and wearing heels, would she be on trial for protecting a child and telling the truth? Not a single juror blinked, but it was Mrs. Lee who flipped the trial on its axis. Her testimony came on day 4, broadcast via secure video from an undisclosed location. Her face, though pixelated and time-worn, carried a calm gravity. I created a clips, she said. The technology Ava exposed was never supposed to exist. She laid it bare. The boardroom betrayals, the forged contracts, the silent complicity of Orchid Tree's leadership. She did not steal. She revealed. And she did it with more honor than the men paid to protect that system. When cross-examined, the prosecution tried to reduce her as a bitter expatriate. Mrs. Lee responded with a smile. If I were white, would I still be called bitter? Silence. Outside the courthouse, protests swelled. Signs read, "Let her speak. Truth is not treason. Black women are not the help. They're the hope." Inside, Ava remained composed. But every night she cried behind the steel walls of her holding cell. Not for herself but for Jalen, whose face she hadn't seen since the raid. She feared what foster care had already done, the distrust it planted, the question it carved into a child's heart. Did my mom abandon me? The trial entered day 10. Media networks had turned the case into a modern morality tale. Cable segments debated everything. Was Ava a hero or a manipulator? A freedom fighter or a fraud? Online, the divide was deeper. Black mothers called her a martyr. Right-wing influencers called her a Marxist plant. On the final day, the judge allowed Ava to speak before the jury. She stepped up slowly. No notes. No podium. Her voice was steady, but it wrapped around the room like prayer. I didn't grow up thinking I'd end up here, she began. I grew up believing if you worked hard, stayed quiet, and didn't ask for too much, maybe you'd be left alone. She paused. But I was wrong. Being invisible doesn't keep you safe. It just keeps you forgotten. She looked at each juror, one by one. I didn't hack a system. I revealed one. One that studies faces like mine, rates voices like mine, and decides which of us are allowed to feel safe, or exist, or mother our own children. Her throat tightened, but she didn't stop. I breastfed a child who wasn't mine because he needed comfort. And in return, the world called me a threat. A maid who dared to care. She stepped back. If being human is a crime, then let the whole world be guilty. Silence. Then the judge nodded. The jury was dismissed. Deliberations stretched for 4 days. Ava waited in a locked cell. Ate through nerves. Prayed. Screamed into her pillow at night. Dreamed of Jalen's small fingers holding hers. And then day 5. Courtroom packed. Phones off. Cameras down. Ava entered in cuffs, as per protocol, but her walk was taller than ever. The judge entered. Jury filed in. Every breath held. But before the verdict could be read, Ava looked toward the audience. And there he was, Jalen, sitting in the back, tears falling freely. His eyes met hers. Mama, he mouthed. And Ava broke. The judge clears his throat, preparing to speak. But the courtroom doors burst open. A federal agent storms in, waving papers. Stop. We have new evidence. Sealed until now. The courtroom held its breath as the federal agent handed a sealed envelope to the judge. Everyone, jury, press, protesters. Even the walls leaned into the silence. The judge peeled the seal slowly, scanned the document, then lifted his gaze to the jury foreperson. "You may proceed," he said quietly. The foreperson, a black woman in her 60s with salt and pepper braids, and the weight of centuries in her eyes. "In the matter of the state versus Ava Monroe, on all counts we find the defendant not guilty." The room shattered. Tears, gasps, gasps turned sobs. Shouted praise, shouted anger. One woman fainted. A court officer wept. Ava didn't move. She sat perfectly still. Not because she was in shock, but because she wasn't. She had felt this moment before it happened. In her bones. In her ancestors. In every mother denied her voice. Her child. Her freedom. The bailiff stepped forward to unlock her handcuffs. Metal clicked. The weight lifted. She walked out through the courthouse's marble doors into a flashbulb frenzy that felt more like a firing squad. "AV-88, are you a hero or a criminal? Did you plant the evidence? Do you regret it? Is it true you were working for China? Are you really just a maid?" She said nothing. Jalen held her hand tightly. She gripped it back like an anchor. The reporters screamed into the space she left behind. The offers came quickly. Talk shows, book deals, brand ambassadorships, interviews with six-figure checks attached. One news anchor offered to fly her and Jalen to Bali for an exclusive healing special. A political group wanted to name her as a candidate for their upcoming congressional ticket. She turned down everything. Her words, she said, weren't for entertainment. And her silence didn't need a stage. Instead, Ava moved back into her Harlem apartment. The building had changed. It was quieter, still recovering from the weight of surveillance and exposure, but it was home. She painted Jalen's room light green, started cooking again, walked the same streets she once cleaned hotel sheets to afford. Only now, people stopped her in the grocery store to say, "My daughter watched you," and asked if she could be more than just what the world saw. "My son cried when they took Jalen. Thank you for getting him back. You didn't just raise a boy. You raised the bar." Mrs. Lai reemerged weeks later, under a new name, and under no illusions. She and Ava started the Mothers Who Know Foundation, a cross-border initiative to protect whistleblowers, advocate for surveillance reform, and fund maternal tech education in under-policed neighborhoods. Their first mission to ensure no other child's face would ever be coded for profit. The foundation grew rapidly. Anonymous donors came forward. Schools requested seminars. Activists marched with banners that read, "We are more than data. Compassion is not an algorithm." Ava didn't speak at the first rally. She handed the mic to a girl from Queens, 12 years old, who had translated Ava's trial speech into Spanish and memorized every word. That night, Ava cried for the first time, not out of fear but because someone young had learned early that truth could have wings. Clark disappeared from tech completely. Rumors swirled. One blog claimed he'd moved to Ghana and was teaching underprivileged kids how to build computers without surveillance software. Another leaked photo of him in Nairobi, scrubbing graffiti from a wall that read, "Truth doesn't need a suit." Ava never saw him again. But once a small envelope arrived, no return address. Inside was a photo of Luca and Clark on a beach. No caption, just a red lotus, drawn in pen. Luca began visiting every Saturday. Mrs. Lee insisted. "He still sees you as the first safe place he ever knew." He would run into Ava's arms, like no time had passed. Jalen would roll his eyes at first, then give in and build blanket forts with him. They played like brothers who shared a story they couldn't yet name. Ava's book came next. It wasn't a memoir. It was a call. Titled The Maid Who Spoke. It was published in both English and Mandarin. The chapters read like testimony, and testimony read like poetry. Each one ended with a question. "What do you see when you see me? Who profits from your silence? If cleaning someone's floor is beneath you, what's beneath your floor?" It sold out in a week. Ava donated every cent to a literacy fund for immigrant domestic workers. The last scene wasn't planned, but it was perfect. Ava stood in front of a classroom in Harlem, filled with 10 black girls between the ages of 7 and 11. Some wore glasses, one wore a hijab, one had hearing aids. All of them were watching her like they were seeing the sun up close. She held no notes, just truth. "You are not what they call you," she said. "Not what they fear you might be. Not what they hope you'll settle for." She walked between their desks. "You will be called things. Strange names, dangerous names, exotic names, names that don't belong to your heart." She paused, Let it sink in. But you answer only to the ones that grow your soul. She knelt beside the smallest girl in the room, eyes wide with wonder. And if anyone ever asks you what you are, say this: I am what they couldn't control. That night, back at home, after Jalen was asleep and the city had settled, Ava checked the mailbox. A single envelope sat inside. No postage, no name. She opened it. Inside was an old, faded photograph. Two women stood shoulder to shoulder in black and white. One of them, Eva's mother, young, radiant, fierce. The other, Mrs. Lee, also decades younger, holding a protest sign in Mandarin. On the back of the photo, a handwritten note: You didn't just speak for us. You were always one of us. BL. Ava stared at it for a long time. Then she turned off the light. In the quiet of the night, her phone buzzed. A new file had been airdropped. No number, no sender. She opened it. It was a blueprint. Label: Eclipse Reborn. Next to it, a voice message. Mrs. Liv's voice. They built one to watch us. Now it's time we build one to protect us. They labeled her a threat for speaking truth, and a criminal for caring too much. But Ava Monroe stood tall, because silence was no longer safety. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or underestimated, you already know her story.